She raised them, she paid for them, and the day they threw her out barefoot, laughing, calling her a failure on the very driveway of the estate she helped save, none of them knew the truth. The broke girl crying on that pavement was secretly dating the man who owned the house, the cars, and the company that fed every single one of them. They were about to find out exactly who Anna really was, and there would be no coming back from it. The Bentwood estate sat behind iron gates on Magnolia Hill, the kind of house that made people slow their cars down just to stare. White stone columns, manicured hedges trimmed into perfect spheres, a driveway wide enough to park 6 cars, and on this particular Tuesday morning in June, it held exactly that many, plus a black Rolls-Royce Wraith that didn't belong to the family at all. Anna Whitfield stood in the marble foyer with a suitcase already packed at her feet, because she'd known this day was coming for 3 years. She just hadn't known it would come dressed like a celebration. "You really thought you could keep living here for free?" Her stepmother, Carol, stood at the top of the staircase in a cream skirt suit, arms crossed, diamond bracelet catching the light. 26 years old, and still eating off plates you didn't buy. "I paid the light bill last month, Carol." Anna's voice was flat, tired. Not angry. She'd run out of angry 2 years ago, and the month before that, and the water bill in March. "Don't start with your math," her father, Robert, said without looking up from his phone. He was scrolling something, stocks probably, or his fantasy football league, the way he always did when Anna spoke, as if her voice was background noise he'd learned to tune out. "You contribute pennies, and you want a parade." Behind him, her older sister Diane snorted into her coffee. Diane had a closet the size of Anna's old bedroom, and hadn't worked a real job in 4 years, living off an allowance their father called a loan, and never once asked to be repaid. "Pennies is generous, Dad. She works at a coffee shop. I work at a marketing firm," Anna said quietly. "I left the coffee shop 2 years ago." "Same thing," Diane said, waving a hand, and the room laughed. Actually laughed. Her uncle Gerald, visiting from Charlotte, let out a real bark of a laugh, slapping his knee like Diane had told the joke of the century. Her Aunt Patrice, perched on the bottom stair in a red floral dress, pressed a hand to her chest and giggled behind it. Even her grandmother Eleanor, usually silent and sharp-eyed, allowed herself a thin, satisfied smile, the kind reserved for moments she'd clearly been waiting for. "I think it's time," Robert said, finally looking up, "that you go figure out your life somewhere else. We're done carrying you." There it was, the sentence she'd been bracing for since the night, 3 weeks ago, when she'd overheard them in the kitchen. Carol's voice low and venomous, talking about finally getting that girl out of this house before she embarrasses us in front of the Caldwells. Anna hadn't understood the comment then. She understood it now, watching Carol's eyes flick toward the driveway, toward the gates, toward the world outside, that apparently mattered more than anything happening inside these walls. "Carrying me," Anna repeated. "I haven't asked you for $1 since I was 22. You're standing in a house we pay for," Carol snapped. "Breathing air we pay for." "That's the math you keep forgetting." Anna picked up her suitcase. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She'd imagined this moment 100 times in the dark, lying awake in the guest room they'd moved her into 2 years ago. The room they liked to remind her was generous of them to offer. And in every version, she cried first and argued second. But standing here now, in the actual moment, something in her had gone quiet and cold, like a switch flipping. "Okay," she said. The word landed strangely in the foyer. Robert blinked. Carol's mouth opened like she'd expected a fight, and didn't know what to do without one. "Okay," Diane repeated, almost disappointed. "That's it? No crying? No begging?" "What do you want me to beg for, Diane?" Anna asked, and for the first time in years she looked her sister dead in the eye without flinching. "A bed in a house where everyone hates me." "Nobody hates you," Eleanor said from the stairs, in the voice of someone delivering a verdict rather than a comfort. "We're just tired of pretending you're worth the trouble." That one landed. Anna felt it land. Felt the old, familiar burn behind her eyes. But she didn't let it show. Not yet. She walked past all of them, past the family portrait on the wall where she'd been cropped slightly out of frame 3 Christmases ago, and nobody had ever bothered to fix it, and pulled open the heavy front door herself. Outside, the June sun was brutal and bright, the kind of light that made everything look like a stage set, and the family, all 6 of them, followed her out onto the front steps. Not to help, not to say goodbye, to watch. That was when Anna understood this wasn't an eviction. It was a show. "Look at her," Gerald said, loud enough to carry, gesturing at her rolling suitcase and the second-hand Louis Vuitton duffel, a gift from a friend, the irony of which suddenly felt unbearable, slung over her shoulder. 26, and dragging her life behind her like a runaway. "She'll be back in a month," Patrice said, not quietly at all. "Begging. She won't have anywhere else to go," Diane added, sipping her coffee like this was brunch theater. "Who's going to take her in? She doesn't even have savings." Anna made it to the bottom of the steps before her knees simply stopped cooperating. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't collapse, didn't faint. She just sat down, hard, on the cool paved driveway, suitcase handle still gripped in one fist, and the tears that she'd held back through the foyer, through the hallway, through the front door, finally came all at once, hot and humiliating, right there in front of all of them, and they laughed. Robert chuckled and shook his head like he was watching a toddler throw a tantrum. Carol actually clapped once, sharp and mocking. "Dramatic as always," she said. "Get up, Anna. You're embarrassing yourself." "She's embarrassing the family," Eleanor corrected from the top step, arms folded over her cream blazer. "There's a difference. Somebody call her little coffee shop friends," Diane said, laughing so hard she had to set her mug down on the railing. "Tell them their charity case needs a ride." Anna sat on the driveway in her sweatpants and a tank top damp with sweat and tears, barefoot because she hadn't even thought to put shoes on before they shoved her belongings out the door, and she let them laugh. She let every single ugly word land, because she knew with absolute certainty that in roughly 40 minutes, every one of them was going to wish they could rewind this moment and erase it from existence. Because the family didn't know what Anna knew. They didn't know that 2 years ago, at a charity gala her father's company had been required to send representatives to, Anna had ended up seated next to a quiet, sharply dressed man named Marcus Bentley, the actual Marcus Bentley, the one whose name was on the building where her father worked, the one who'd quietly acquired this very estate 18 months ago through a holding company nobody in the family had bothered to investigate, the one who currently owned 60% of Whitfield Caldwell Logistics, the company that employed her father, her uncle, and technically they didn't know that Anna had been dating him in near total secrecy for 19 months, because Marcus valued his privacy fiercely after a previous relationship had ended in a tabloid feeding frenzy, and because Anna, for reasons she could no longer fully justify to herself, had wanted just once, to be loved by someone who had no idea how much money was attached to her name, before that money became the only thing anyone cared about. They didn't know that the broke coffee shop girl they were laughing at right now had turned down a marriage proposal 4 months ago, not because she didn't love him, but because she wasn't ready, and he had respected that without question, which was more grace than her own family had shown her in a decade. And they certainly didn't know that the black car idling in their driveway, the one Carol had been admiring through the window all morning, assuming it belonged to a neighbor's visitor, had a driver who was, at this exact moment, 3 minutes away from delivering a confidential courier package to Robert Whitfield. A package containing the restructuring notice for Whitfield Caldwell Logistics, signed by its majority shareholder. Anna didn't know that last part yet either. Not exactly, but she would very soon. She pushed herself up off the pavement, ignoring Carol's continued instructions to get up before the neighbors see, and didn't look back at the house. She didn't say goodbye. She simply walked, suitcase wheels clattering against brick, down the long driveway and through the side pedestrian gate, because the family had locked the main one behind her with theatrical finality and called a rideshare with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 41 minutes later, she was standing outside a different gate entirely, one with no name on the call box, because Marcus didn't believe in advertising where he slept, pressing the buzzer with a tear-streaked face and bare, bruised feet, holding everything she owned in 2 bags. The gate clicked open before she even finished pressing it a second time. Security here moved fast when her code came through. She didn't make it to the front door before he was already coming through it. Marcus Bentley was not a man who ran. In 19 months, Anna had never once seen him hurry, not through airports, not through board meetings, not even the night his father had been hospitalized. He moved through the world like someone who had never needed to chase anything in his life. He was running now. Anna, his voice cracked slightly on the second syllable, which was the only sign of how alarmed he was, because his face had gone instantly, terrifyingly calm. The calm she'd learned over a year and a half meant he was furious and working very hard not to show it. He reached her in seconds, hands going to her shoulders, then her face, checking, actually checking, like a man looking for injuries, before his eyes dropped to her bare feet, scraped from the gravel walk, and something in his jaw tightened so hard she heard it. "What happened to you?" he said. Not a question. A demand, low and dangerous. The kind of voice she imagined he used in boardrooms right before someone lost their job. Anna's voice broke entirely, the dam she'd held since the driveway finally collapsing. "They threw me out, Marcus. My own family. They stood on the steps and laughed at me. They called me a charity case in front of the whole street. I didn't even have time to put on shoes." His hand came up to her face, thumb wiping at a tear track, with a gentleness that contrasted violently with the stillness in the rest of him. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." And Anna, sitting down hard on the cold marble steps of the house she'd never told her family belonged to the man standing in front of her, began to talk. She told him about 3 years of being treated like a guest in her own childhood home after her mother died and Carol moved in within 8 months. She told him about the allowance Diane got that Anna never received, despite being the one who'd actually finished her degree without their help. She told him about birthdays skipped, about being left off the family portrait, about Eleanor's careful surgical cruelty disguised as honesty. She told him about today, every laugh, every word, every single person who had stood on those steps and turned her humiliation into entertainment. Marcus listened without interrupting once, which was, in its own way, more frightening than if he'd raged. When she finally finished, wrung out and shaking, he was quiet for a long moment, staring somewhere past her shoulder at nothing. "Robert works for me," he said finally, very evenly. "Did you know that? Truly know it, not just on paper." Anna nodded slowly. "I know. I've known for a while. I never told them. I didn't want—" She stopped, swallowing. "I didn't want it to be about that. I wanted them to just love me, without it being about money. They had that chance," Marcus said. "For 26 years they had that chance." He looked at her then, and something in his expression had shifted from alarm into something colder, more deliberate. "I have a board meeting with Whitfield Caldwell's senior leadership in—" He checked his watch. 6 days. Quarterly restructuring review. "Marcus." Anna's stomach dropped. "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched down in front of her, took both of her bare, scraped feet gently into his hands, like they were something precious, and looked up at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before, not even the night he'd proposed. "I'm going to do," he said quietly, "exactly what they should have known to be afraid of." The next morning, Anna woke up in a bed that wasn't hers, in a wing of the house she still hadn't fully memorized after a year of visits. Wrapped in a blanket, someone had clearly added to the bed sometime after she'd fallen asleep crying. Her feet had been cleaned and bandaged. There was a tray on the nightstand. Tea, toast, a small bowl of berries, untouched since she'd been too exhausted to eat the night before. Marcus was already gone. A note sat folded beside the tray, his handwriting tight and controlled the way it always was when he was thinking too many things at once. "Stay as long as you need. The house is yours, whether you believe that yet or not. Don't check your phone today. I mean that. M." She checked her phone anyway, of course. 43 missed calls, mostly from numbers she'd long since saved as "Do Not Answer, Carol," and "Do Not Answer, Dad." A scattering of texts from Diane, the tone shifting in real time from mocking to confused, to something approaching panic. "Lol. Mom says you're being dramatic. Come get your stuff." "Anna, seriously. Where are you? Dad's freaking out. Something happened at work. Call him, Anna. Call someone back right now." Anna set the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't touch it again for 3 hours. What Anna didn't see, because Marcus had asked her, gently but firmly, to stay away from the office that week entirely, was the scene that unfolded inside the glass-walled executive conference room of Whitfield Caldwell Logistics at 9 o'clock that same morning. Robert Whitfield had been summoned, along with the rest of senior leadership, for what the calendar invite called a quarterly operational review. He'd assumed it would be routine. He'd assumed wrong the moment he walked in and saw, for the first time in person, rather than on a letterhead, the majority shareholder of the company seated at the head of the table. "Mr. Whitfield," Marcus said, not rising, not extending a hand. "Sit." Robert sat. Around the table, 12 other executives shifted uncomfortably, sensing immediately that whatever this meeting actually was, it bore no resemblance to the agenda they'd been sent. "I want to talk about culture," Marcus said, opening a slim folder in front of him without looking at its contents. He'd memorized every line already. Specifically, the culture of how people treat the people closest to them when no one important is supposedly watching. "Because I've found," That's usually the most accurate test of someone's character. Not how they behave in a boardroom, how they behave in their own driveway. The room went very still. Robert's face had gone slightly grey, though he didn't yet understand why. Yesterday morning, Marcus continued, voice level, almost conversational. A 26-year-old woman was thrown out of a family home with no shoes on her feet, while 6 adults stood on the front steps and laughed at her, called her a charity case, speculated, loudly, about whether her coffee shop friends would be willing to come pick up the trash the family no longer wanted to deal with. A junior VP near the end of the table let out a small, nervous cough, sensing the shape of where this was going before Robert did. "I happen to know quite a lot about that woman," Marcus said, finally looking directly at Robert. "I know, for instance, that she's never once spoken poorly of her family, even when she had every reason to. I know she paid utility bills in a house she was told, repeatedly, that she didn't deserve to live in for free. I know she finished her degree with no financial help from anyone in that house, and built a career in marketing that several departments in this very building could stand to learn from. And I know, because she told me herself last night, while I cleaned gravel out of the cuts on her feet, that her name is Anna Whitfield." Robert's mouth opened. No sound came out. "Your daughter," Marcus said quietly, "is the woman I've been in a relationship with for the past 19 months. The woman I asked to marry 4 months ago. The woman whose family I have apparently been paying salaries to this entire time, without a single one of you having the decency to treat her like a human being." The silence that followed was the kind that physically pressed against the walls of the room. "Sir," Robert finally managed, voice thin, "I had no idea." "I know you didn't," Marcus said. "That's rather the point. You treated her like she was worthless because you genuinely believed no one of consequence would ever find out, or care, how she was treated. That tells me everything I need to know about the values running through this organization's senior leadership." He closed the folder. "Effective today, your role at Whitfield Caldwell is under formal review, pending an internal investigation into conduct, culture, and several financial irregularities my team flagged 8 months ago that, frankly, I had been giving you the benefit of the doubt on. I am no longer inclined to give anyone in this family the benefit of the doubt. Marcus, Mr. Bentley, please can we discuss—" "You can discuss it with HR and legal," Marcus said, already rising from the table. "I have somewhere to be." By the time Anna finally turned her phone back on that evening, the story had already detonated through her family group chat, which she was technically still part of, despite 3 years of being treated like an outsider within it. "Diane, please tell me this isn't real. Diane, Anna, are you actually dating Marcus Bentley?" "Diane, the Marcus Bentley." "Carol, Anna, sweetheart, we need to talk. Please, call me Carol. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Gerald, hey kiddo, lol, just wanted to check in. Hope everything's okay with you. Patrice. Anna, darling, I always knew you had something special about you. We should catch up soon." Anna stared at the messages for a long time, feeling something cold and clarifying settle into her chest. Not satisfaction exactly. Something closer to grief. Grief for the version of her family who might have loved her like this all along, if only they'd known how, instead of only learning to perform it once they found out what she was worth. She didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she found Marcus in his study, jacket off, sleeves rolled, going through what looked like a stack of financial documents with the kind of focus that meant he hadn't eaten in hours. "You went to the office," she said quietly from the doorway. He looked up. I told you not to check your phone. I didn't. I checked it 5 hours after you told me not to. Different thing entirely. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk, looking down at him. What did you do, Marcus? I told the truth, he said simply. In a boardroom, in front of 12 witnesses, which is apparently the only audience your family actually respects. Anna exhaled slowly. My dad's job is under review, Marcus said, for the same financial irregularities that have been sitting in a compliance report for 8 months, which I had been quietly protecting him from, because he's your father and I didn't want to complicate things between us. I'm done protecting him. His eyes softened slightly as he watched her face. I need you to understand something, Anna. I'm not doing this for revenge. I don't actually care about revenge. It's a hollow thing. It doesn't fix what happened to you yesterday, and it won't make those scars on your feet disappear any faster. I'm doing this because I refuse to let people who treated you like garbage continue benefiting from a company built, in no small part, on the years I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion to be independent from them. They're still my family, Anna said quietly, and hated how small her voice sounded. I know, Marcus said, and that's exactly why I need you to decide something tonight. And I need you to be honest with yourself when you do it. He set down the documents and took both her hands in his. Do you want them punished? Or do you want them gone from your life entirely, with no further performance, no further consequence, just silence, and the freedom to finally stop bracing for the next time they hurt you? Anna thought about the driveway, the laughter, Eleanor's voice calling her not worth the trouble, Diane's coffee mug clinking against the porch railing, like a toast to her humiliation. And then she thought about something else, a small, stubborn memory from when she was 11, before her mother died, before Carol, before any of it. Her mother teaching her to ride a bike in that same driveway, laughing not at her, but with her, catching her every single time she wobbled. I want them to understand what they actually lost, Anna said finally. Not the money, not the house. Me. I want, just once, for them to sit in a room and actually understand that. Marcus studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then that's what they'll get, he said. One room, one chance to understand. And then we close this door for good. The invitation arrived 6 days later, hand-delivered by courier to the Bentwood estate. The very house Anna had been thrown out of, addressed not to Robert, but to the entire family. Cream cardstock, elegant simple type, requesting their presence at a private dinner at Bentley Towers' executive residence to discuss matters of mutual importance regarding Whitfield Caldwell logistics and family affairs. Carol had assumed it was an apology tour. Robert, chastened and quietly terrified after the board meeting, suspected something closer to a sentencing. Diane mostly just wanted to see the inside of the building everyone in her social circle had been talking about for a week. Eleanor said nothing, which from her was its own kind of warning. They arrived at 7, dressed like they were attending a gala rather than what was actually, functionally, an intervention. Carol in cream silk, Diane in gold satin that caught the light of the private elevator, Robert in a suit he hadn't worn since his last performance review. Gerald and Patrice had been invited too, somewhat to their own surprise, given they technically weren't part of the household, but Marcus had insisted, because he wanted every voice from that driveway in the same room when the truth finally landed. They were shown into a private dining room on the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A long table set for 8, and absolutely no food on it. Anna was already seated, not at the foot of the table, not in some symbolic position of return. At the head, beside Marcus, dressed simply, calmly, her bandaged feet, now healed enough that she wore heels for the first time in a week. "Sit," Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chairs, his tone identical to the one he'd used in the boardroom 6 days earlier. Nobody argued. "This isn't a social dinner," he continued once they'd settled, uneasy and silent for the first time any of them could remember being in each other's company. "I want to be direct about that immediately, because I don't believe in wasting anyone's time, including my own. You're here because 6 days ago, every person at this table either actively humiliated my partner on her own front steps or stood by and laughed while it happened. I want to give you the only thing I think you actually owe her, which is the truth, said out loud, in a room you can't pretend wasn't real afterward." Carol's composure cracked first. "Marcus, if I had known, you'd have what?" Anna's voice cut in, quiet but absolutely steady. It was the first time she'd spoken since they walked in, and the sound of it seemed to physically startle Carol into silence. "Been nicer to me because you found out I was valuable." "Carol, that's not an apology. That's a confession." "Anna, sweetheart, that's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," Anna said. "And it's exactly what I needed you to say out loud, actually. So thank you for that." Robert cleared his throat, hands flat on the table like he was trying to steady himself against it. "Anna, I know what this looks like, but I want you to know I never meant for things to go as far as they did. We were under a lot of stress after your mother passed and—" "Dad." Anna's voice didn't rise, but something in it sharpened enough to stop him cold. "Mum died 4 years ago. I was 22. I'm 26 now. How long is the grace period for stress supposed to last?" Because from where I was sitting, it never had an expiration date. It just became the excuse you reached for every single time someone needed a reason for why I didn't matter as much as Diane. Diane, who'd been unusually quiet, finally looked up. "I never said you didn't matter. You called me a charity case in front of the entire street, Diane, 6 days ago, while I cried on the driveway." Anna's eyes didn't waver. "I have known you for 26 years. I have never once laughed at you when you were on the ground." The table went silent again. Outside the windows, the city lights had started to flicker on, indifferent to the small, devastating reckoning happening 42 floors above the street. Eleanor, who had said nothing this entire time, finally spoke, her voice as dry and unbothered as it had been on the front steps. "And what exactly do you want from us now, Anna? An apology? Tears? I'm 78 years old. I don't perform remorse for theater." "No," Anna said, and something in her voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with something closer to exhausted clarity. "I don't actually want anything from you, Grandma. That's the part I think none of you understand yet. I'm not here to extract an apology I don't believe any of you are capable of meaning. I'm here because Marcus asked me what I wanted, and what I told him was that I wanted you to understand what you lost, not the company, not whatever happens to Dad's job, which honestly isn't even my decision to make. I wanted you, just once, in a room you couldn't laugh your way out of, to understand that I was never the embarrassment. I was the only one of you who never needed an audience to know my own worth." She stood up slowly, smoothing her dress, and looked around the table at each of them in turn. Carol, frozen mid-excuse. Robert, grey-faced and silent. Diane, blinking back something that looked, for the first time in years, like genuine shame. Gerald and Patrice, who hadn't said a single word since arriving, clearly understanding now that their laughter on those steps had not been the harmless joke they'd told themselves it was. And finally Eleanor, unmoved, unmoving, exactly as cold as she'd always been. "I'm not asking any of you to apologize," Anna said. "I don't think most of you know how. What I am telling you is that this is the last room we'll ever sit in together. There won't be another dinner. There won't be another driveway. Marcus isn't firing anyone out of revenge. That part is between him and the company's investors. And frankly, none of you have ever cared about doing right by people who couldn't fight back. So I don't expect you to suddenly start caring about doing right by each other. But I am done. Whatever happens to this family from here, it happens without me watching, and without me hoping it gets better. I already gave that hope 26 years. I don't have any left." She turned to Marcus, who rose without a word, offering his arm. "Anna, please," Carol said, voice cracking for the first time, with something that might have actually been real. "Please don't do this. We're your family." Anna paused at the doorway, looking back one final time, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet, settled exhaustion of someone closing a door they'd spent years trying to keep open, out of obligation rather than love. "You were my family," she said. "On the driveway, while you were laughing, you made it very clear that wasn't true anymore. I'm just the first person brave enough to finally believe you." She walked out of the private dining room without looking back again, Marcus's hand steady at the small of her back, and the elevator doors closed on 6 stunned faces and a city skyline glittering below them, utterly indifferent to the silence they'd be sitting in for a long time to come. 6 months later, Whitfield Caldwell Logistics had a new senior leadership team. Robert Whitfield's name was no longer on the directory. Diane's consulting position had quietly been dissolved during a routine restructuring nobody contested too loudly, given the irregularities still under review. The Bentwood estate had new tenants, distant cousins of Marcus's as it happened, who would never know or care about the family drama that had once unfolded on their front steps. Anna didn't follow any of it closely. She'd started her own small marketing consultancy that spring. With seed funding she'd insisted on structuring as a loan from Marcus rather than a gift, repaid in full within 4 months, because some forms of independence mattered more to her than convenience ever would. She and Marcus got married in October, in a small ceremony with 11 guests, none of whom shared her last name by blood. She wore shoes the entire day,